I'm curious, as you have been an educator, during this season and transitioned recently into more of this investment activity, how all of this has impacted Nigeria specifically, and then maybe dovetail for me how you got into this angel investing world and how all this applies in our little startup world, which is pretty different from the rest of the finance stack.
I agree. I totally agree. Maybe because I've always been around the space, it doesn't feel new. I'd explain. So I come from a background where I was trained to be an accountant. I take a few degrees in accounting, and whilst taking those degrees, I got very interested in more non-accounting courses than the core accounting courses. Courses around business strategy, growth, markets, branding. Those got my attention more than the crunching of the numbers. And so, even though I was a good student crunching numbers, I was more fascinated and more passionate about the makings and the workings of good businesses locally and globally. So, as a second year student in the university, I would study about economies of the world and economies of African states. I could tell about the inflation crisis in Zimbabwe. I could tell a lot of things around the African um, economies. And I use that a lot in all of my examples in school. And my teachers would be like, yo, where did you get this from? Can I get the source material? And I'd have to go bring out the magazine, whether it's the African Business Report or it was Forbes. And this back in the day, were very expensive magazines to own, but I would save of my feeding money, my allowances, and go into town to get those magazines. I get stacks of them, and then after I'm done studying school books, I begin to read those magazines voraciously. Now, those studies and deliberate readings help prepare my mind for a work in consulting and um, just the global outlook of doing business, even though I was stuck in far away, deeper sides of Africa. So lots of people know Lagos as the very popular city. There's other parts of Nigeria that are not as popular. Some of them are really remote, and my university was in one of such places. So when I say I go to town to buy those magazines, it was really a journey. I probably would do a 6 hour boat ride to and 6 hour back. I do that once every week just because I wanted to get materials. Once every month, yeah, because I wanted to get material enough to be able to study. So I started my own consulting practice for small businesses by my third year in the university. Now, how that even happened was more interesting. One of our lecturers back in the day was a Nigerian who lived in the US, I think he also worked in consulting in the US, and then he'll come back to Nigeria every other month to teach his classes, you know, and he inspired me so much. I said I wanted to lead this kind of life. I wanted to be, I wanted to have my family and my work somewhere else. I wanted to be a visiting lecturer somewhere else, and do that across countries. And because he was a practitioner, it was easy for him to really help us see that we're not just studying stuff. This is happening. This is life. And he will give you examples upon examples of businesses that he had either had interest in as an investor or the ones that he was consulting for as a consultant. And so his business strategy classes were really interesting classes for me. And because, of course, I had begun to study about businesses globally, it was easy for me to connect with the gentleman. And I had an A in that course, I remember, first semester and the second semester. But that launched me into my own consulting practice. So by my third year, I'd created a brochure, registered a small business, a small consulting business, and began to provide um, brand and strategy services for small businesses back then. So you see, that introduction already got me into the small business play, and I began to already engage business owners. I was 21, yeah, maybe 21, 22. So I was pretty young. You could tell that I was Rudy. You could tell that I wasn't your um, very experienced consultant. I was very knowledgeable. That's something that you couldn't take away from me. You could take that I was fresh, but I knew what I was talking about deeply.
Well, and it sounds like you had some hustle too. I mean, nobody takes a 6 hour boat ride to pick up some magazines
Yeah,
and doesn't walk away with a sense of hustle. That's incredible.
yeah. So I always had it going. I always had that. You've got to put in the work. So that got me already into the whole startup space. Graduated from the university. Then I took a job in banking. So in banking, I was thrust into the retail end of banking. And so I worked as a credit officer, providing loans and services and advisory services really for small business owners yet again. And so I'd come to understand the psychology of the average small business owner and even the dynamics of their finances, with the margins, the profitability. And that's why I could tell. Then the more I studied around this and grew in my understanding of how finance work, I realized that small businesses, small, medium, and small, medium, and maybe large businesses are one side of the spectrum, and then there's the other side of the spectrum where you have the hyper growth startups that the VC guys are usually interested in. Took a study down that road, and then the the understanding and the knowledge and the learnings around angel investing then came to bear. I worked in banking for a bit, say about 5 years. Then I left. I came back to my private consulting practice, but this time I was providing consulting services for the banks because, of course, I just left the banks and I could see gaps, and I began to provide consulting services, interventions around and innovation, strategy and innovation, and that got me into now the innovations play and understanding how businesses, both big and small, innovate. So I had sessions on creativity, I had sessions on innovation, and I did that for quite a number of Nigerian banks, both at regional levels and at national levels. And so once I kept that consulting up, my appetite as an angel investor and my knowledge of the field also grew over the years. I remember talking with big banks to say, hey, how's Facebook going to affect banking in Nigeria? What's the connection between?
Hmm.
Yeah, so how back then, this were very early days.